In Chicago's underworld, there are two kinds of people: those who believe in sanctuary, and those who learn the hard way that sanctuary only exists as long as someone is willing to bleed for it. The Midnight Orchid wasn't just a jazz bar. It was a confession booth wrapped in velvet and smoke, where sins were nursed alongside single malt and debts were paid in silence instead of screams. Corrupt senators smoothed over scandals beneath low amber lighting. Cartel accountants calculated blood money, while saxophones wept in B minor. And men like Ha Joon came to pretend that exile felt anything like freedom. He occupied the corner of the mahogany bar like a king without a throne, charcoal suit immaculate, despite the weight of everything it concealed. His platinum watch caught the dim light with each breath, each sip of 30-year scotch that tasted like regret and cost like revenge. To the few who still whispered his name in Seoul, he was the Iron Dragon, the man who'd walked away from an empire built on loyalty and buried in betrayal. Tonight, he was trying to believe that neutral ground meant something. That maybe, just maybe, the past couldn't find him here. Blossom Gates moved through the closing hour like mathematics set to music. She didn't smile the way bartenders in Chicago smiled, that bright performative warmth designed to inflate tips and deflate tension. Her face carried the kind of stillness that came from making impossible choices and living with them quietly. Her hands, steady as a surgeon's and twice as deliberate, wiped down glasses and restocked bottles with a precision that seemed almost choreographed. Ha Joon noticed. He told himself he shouldn't. But there was something in the way she tracked the room, not with a bartender's hospitality, but with a hunter's instinct. Her eyes didn't just see, they measured. Distance to exits. Angles of approach. Blind spots that shouldn't matter in a place where violence was forbidden. Her posture suggested coiled readiness beneath the crisp white button-down and leather vest, like a blade hidden inside silk. She moved through space as if perpetually calculating threats that didn't exist, except tonight. They did. At 11:47 p.m., the door chimed once. Then twice. Then 4 more times in rhythmic succession, like a death knell disguised as courtesy. 6 men entered, long coats heavy with rain and something darker, gun oil, and intent. They didn't look around. They didn't need to. They'd already memorized the layout, already chosen their kill zones, already decided that rules were just suggestions written by people who weren't in the room. The jazz didn't stop. But Blossom's hands did, frozen mid-pour, and Ha Joon knew with the certainty of a man who'd survived a dozen assassination attempts that sanctuary had just become a cage. One where the walls were closing in, the bars were bullets, and the only key to survival was a woman no one had bothered to truly see, but to understand how a bartender became the only thing standing between a fallen king and death. You need to understand that Blossom Gates wasn't born behind Chicago bars. She was forged somewhere the government doesn't acknowledge, doing work they'd never admit, erasing problems that were supposed to stay erased. They called her the cleanest killer in the program. The one who left no evidence, no witnesses, no loose ends, until the night she left one. A young man with fire in his eyes and his father's blood on his hands. A man named Ha Joon, and Ha Joon, he'd spent a decade believing that anonymity made him invisible, that distance made him safe, that the dragon could become the mouse if he just stayed quiet enough. Tonight, 6 professionals with military precision and a vendetta older than his American exile were about to teach him that the past doesn't forget. It just waits for the perfect moment to collect. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The first man made it 3 steps inside before Blossom's hand found the cocktail shaker. Not the decorative silver one tourists photographed for Instagram, but the weighted stainless steel model she kept within reach for nights when politeness stopped working. It connected with his temple with a sound like a thunderclap wrapped in silk, and he dropped without ceremony, his hand halfway to the gun beneath his coat. The jazz record skipped once. Twice. Then continued, because Billie Holiday had sung through worse than this. Ha Joon's scotch hit the floor, 30 years of aging wasted on 100-year-old wood. He moved on instinct, the kind burned into muscle memory from decades of survival, reaching for the ankle holster that had served him through 7 near-death experiences. But Blossom was already moving, and she moved like violence choreographed by someone who understood that economy of motion was the difference between living and becoming a cautionary tale. The second man got his weapon clear. The third man got a shot off, wild and high, embedding itself in the tin ceiling where it would stay for the next decade as a reminder that the Midnight Orchid wasn't as neutral as advertised. The fourth man was smarter, tactical, moving to flank with the precision of someone who'd done this in Kandahar and Mogadishu before bringing his expertise to private sector massacres. Blossom went low, using the bar as cover and momentum. She grabbed the ice pick, the long one, the industrial model designed for breaking apart the blocks she special ordered from a supplier who didn't ask questions, and came up inside the second man's guard. The pick found the soft space beneath his jaw, angled up, precise as surgery and twice as permanent. He made a sound like surprise, like maybe he'd expected a bartender to beg or negotiate or do anything except end him with the same efficiency she used to craft old fashions. The third man, the one who'd wasted a bullet on architecture, tried to recalibrate. He was slow. Not by normal standards. By normal standards, he was special forces fast, the kind of operator who'd spent a decade turning reaction time into religion. But Blossom Gates had been erasing people before he'd learned to shave, and she learned from the kind of teachers who didn't tolerate second-place finishes. She vaulted the bar, not over, through the space where the hinged sections swung up for entry. And the brass cocktail strainer caught the overhead light like a prayer before it caught his throat. Not lethal, but controlling. She dropped her weight, used his own mass against him, and introduced his face to the mahogany bar rail with the kind of force that rearranged facial structures and consciousness simultaneously. Point 3 down. 3 standing. And Ha Joon, finally, getting his weapon clear, the fourth man, the tactical thinker, made his play. He had cover behind an overturned table, had decent sight lines, had every advantage except one. He thought he was fighting a bartender defending her workplace. He didn't understand he was in a cage with something that had spent years learning to kill in spaces much smaller than this. Blossom's hand found the concealed release beneath the bar. The kind of mechanism that would never pass a health inspection, that existed in the blueprint as a decorative panel, but functioned as something else entirely. The sawed-off Remington 870 dropped into her palm like benediction and blasphemy, chrome and threat, loaded with the kind of rounds designed to turn cover into memory she didn't name. She pointed, the way you'd point at an equation, and stated its solution with absolute certainty. The discharge was apocalyptic in the enclosed space, all physics and consequence. The table the fourth man hid behind became splinters and regret, and he became a problem that gravity solved with terminal efficiency. The fifth man broke. Not physically, his body stayed intact, stayed operational, stayed dangerous. But something in his eyes admitted defeat before his trigger finger got the message. He was the youngest, maybe 26, maybe still believed that being fast and well-trained meant something against a woman who'd learned to kill in rooms where hesitation was indistinguishable from suicide. He fired twice. Both shots wild, both carrying the desperation of a man who'd signed up for an assassination and found himself in an execution. Blossom moved between the bullets like she could see them coming, like the math of trajectory and velocity was just another language she'd learned before most people learned to lie. She closed the distance, 5 feet to 3 to 0, and the shotgun barrel caught him across the temple. He dropped like theology, sudden and absolute. The sixth man was the leader. You could tell by the way he hadn't moved, hadn't fired, hadn't done anything except watch his team dissolve like aspirin in water. He wore a tactical trench coat that probably cost more than a used car, and his face had the professional stillness of someone who killed for policy, not passion. The bar was neutral, he said, voice carrying the educated diction of someone who'd attended good schools before learning to murder people between breakfast and lunch. That was the agreement. Agreements are just promises made by people who weren't in the room. Blossom's voice was steady, conversational, the same tone she used to explain the difference between bourbon and rye to tourists who didn't actually care. The shotgun never wavered. You came into my place. You broke my rule. You made assumptions about who I am and what I'd tolerate. The sixth man smiled. It wasn't pleasant. It was the kind of expression you'd see on a chess player who'd just realized he'd lost, but decided to play out the endgame anyway because protocols demanded completion. You're the eraser. Not a question. A recognition. I used to be. Blossom's finger rested on the trigger, patient as mathematics. But tonight? Tonight, I'm just tired of cleaning up other people's mistakes. He went for his weapon. Fast, trained, professional. But Blossom was already moving, closing the angle, denying him space. The shotgun stock caught his wrist with surgical precision, bones breaking with a sound like dry branches in winter. His weapon hit the floor, useless, and Blossom's boot sent it skittering toward Ha Joon, who'd spent the entire engagement pressed against the liquor shelf, weapon drawn, watching a bartender turn 6 professionals into cautionary tales. "Stay down," Blossom told the 6th man. It wasn't a threat. It was just instruction, the way you'd tell someone to breathe underwater or regret the consequences. He stayed down. The jazz record ended. The silence that followed was the kind that made you reconsider every choice that led to this moment. The basement beneath the Midnight Orchid wasn't on any city permit. It existed in the space between architecture and intention, accessible through a door behind the wine cellar that looked decorative but functioned as threshold between the world Blossom showed people and the world she actually inhabited. Ha Joon descended the stairs, one hand pressed against his side where the 3rd man's wild shot had found him after all. Not deep, the bullet had carved a canyon through flesh without finding anything essential, but enough that his gray suit was trying out a new crimson pattern that his tailor would never approve. "Sit," Blossom said, gesturing to a steel table that looked like it belonged in a morgue or a very dedicated enthusiast's workshop. The room was climate-controlled, humming with electronics that probably cost more than the bar above generated in a year. Monitors covered one wall, showing feeds from 40 different angles: the bar, the street, the alley, the roof access, sight lines Ha Joon hadn't even considered existed. "You're bleeding on my surveillance hub," she added, pulling a medical kit from a cabinet that revealed itself to be much deeper than the wall should have allowed. "That's proprietary equipment. Blood voids the warranty." Ha Joon sat, because standing felt like negotiating with gravity from a position of weakness. "You're not a bartender." "I'm an excellent bartender." Blossom cut away his shirt with scissors that were too sharp, too surgical, too familiar with the geography of the human body. "I can make 17 variations of a Manhattan, and I know the difference between shaking and stirring. But you're right. I'm also other things." The monitors cycled through footage, time-stamped and meticulous. Ha Joon watched the ambush replay from 6 different angles, watched himself move in slow motion toward the ankle holster he never managed to use, watched Blossom dismantle 6 professionals with the same efficiency most people use to make coffee. "How long have you known?" he asked. "That you were Ha Joon, the Iron Dragon of Seoul." Blossom threaded a needle with the steady hands of someone who'd done this in worse conditions, with less light, while bullets turned cover into suggestion. "Since the second night you walked into my bar. You ordered Hibiki 21, neat, and watched the door like you expected your father to walk through it." The needle pierced skin. Ha Joon didn't flinch. He'd been shot, stabbed, burned, and worse over the years. Pain had become just another language he'd learned to speak. "My father's been dead for 10 years. "I know." Blossom pulled the suture tight, precise, creating closure where there'd been opening. "I'm the one who killed him." The words landed like mathematics, cold and irrefutable. Ha Joon's hand moved toward the weapon he no longer had, then stopped, because what exactly was he going to do? He was sitting half-naked on a table, being stitched up by the woman who'd just saved his life, in a basement that suggested surveillance capabilities that probably flagged this conversation to servers in 3 different countries. The Dragon Compound. February 9, 2015. Blossom's voice carried no apology, no justification, just the factual recitation of someone discussing weather patterns or market trends. "I was sent to eliminate the entire bloodline. Your father, your uncle, your 2 cousins, and you. Clean sweep. Erase the problem, bill the agency, move to the next file. But you didn't." Ha Joon's voice was surprisingly steady, all things considered. "I'm sitting here," which suggests the job was incomplete. I killed your father with a rifle shot from 800 meters. Killed your uncle with his own security system. Your cousins died in what the police called a murder-suicide, but was really just me being thorough. Blossom tied off the suture, examined her work with the critical eye of someone who'd been graded on far worse. I was supposed to make look like a suicide. Guilt over the family's collapse. Poetic justice for a dynasty built on violence. She pulled out bandages, began wrapping his torso with the practiced efficiency of field medicine translated to basement surgery. But when I found you, you weren't planning revenge or plotting survival. You were in your room, crying, trying to burn your father's ledgers. All the evidence of all the terrible things your family had done. You were trying to erase your own legacy before it could follow you. So you let me live out of pity. Ha Joon's words carried an edge that could cut glass or pride, whichever was softer. I let you live because you were the only one trying to do the right thing. Blossom secured the bandage, stepped back to examine her work. The agency wanted you dead because you were a liability. But I saw something else. I saw someone who might actually break the cycle. So I faked your death not perfectly, but well enough that the agency closed the file and moved on. And I told you to run. Ha Joon remembered that night. The figure in black, face obscured, weapon lowered. The voice that had said 3 words, run. Stay hidden. He thought it was a rival gang showing unexpected mercy, or divine intervention, or a hallucination brought on by grief and terror. You gave me a new life. The realization hit him like theology, reshaping everything he'd believed about coincidence and fate. I gave you a chance. Blossom pulled on a clean shirt, not the blood-stained bartender uniform, but tactical black that suggested tonight's politeness was officially over. What you did with it was your choice. And from what I've seen over the past 6 months, you chose to stay quiet, stay clean, try to build something different than what your father built. She gestured to the monitors, which now showed the 6 men being zip-tied by figures in tactical gear that appeared from angles Ha Joon hadn't seen them approach from. But someone found you anyway. Someone violated my sanctuary. And someone knew enough about me to gamble that I'd intervene. Why? Ha Joon stood, testing his balance, finding that the pain was manageable if he didn't breathe too deeply or expect miracles. Why save me again? Blossom looked at him, and for the first time since the bullet started flying, her expression carried something other than tactical assessment. Maybe regret. Maybe something heavier. Because 10 years ago, I made a choice that the agency would have killed me for if they'd known. And because every job I did after that, every name I erased, every problem I solved, I saw your face. The one person I let walk away. She pulled on tactical gloves, the kind reinforced with Kevlar and consequence. Turns out mercy is expensive. It compounds. And tonight, someone sent 6 professionals to collect on a debt I didn't know I owed. The monitors showed Chicago's night, rain-slicked and infinite. Somewhere in that grid of light and dark, someone knew both their names, knew their history, knew exactly which buttons to push to turn Sanctuary into slaughter. We need to find who sent them, Ha Joon said. We need to find the broker. Blossom checked a weapon that appeared from somewhere Ha Joon's vision hadn't tracked. The man who sold your location, who sold the idea that the Midnight Orchid was vulnerable. In Chicago's underworld, there's only one person who traffics in that kind of information. Where do we find him? Blossom smiled. It wasn't comforting. Ever been to an underground fight club where they bet on death? The last round existed in the kind of space cities pretended didn't. 3 levels beneath a condemned meatpacking plant, accessible only through maintenance tunnels that wound through Chicago's industrial decay like arteries through a dying body. Blossom navigated the path with the certainty of someone who'd walked it before, probably while carrying something the authorities wouldn't approve of. The air tasted like blood and sweat and money, thick with the particular humidity that came from too many bodies in too little space, generating too much heat. The fights happened in a cage that had seen enough violence to probably qualify as a historical landmark, surrounded by stadium seating stolen from the demolished White Sox Park and populated by the kind of people who considered morality a suggestion they'd declined. Ha Joon kept close, his wound a constant reminder that tonight he was operating at less than full capacity. The platinum watch on his wrist drew eyes, the wrong kind of eyes, the kind that calculated net worth and vulnerability in the same glance. But Blossom's presence beside him seemed to shift equations, turn predators into accountants recalculating acceptable losses. "The broker's name is Marcus Trent," Blossom said, voice pitched low beneath the roar of the crowd watching two men try to end each other in the cage. "He used to work State Department, back when State Department meant doing things they'd never testify about. Now he brokers information. Locations, layouts, security gaps. If someone found you at the Midnight Orchid, Trent sold them the map." "How do we get to him?" we ask politely. Blossom's smile suggested her definition of polite had been significantly revised by recent events. "And if that doesn't work, we ask him politely while standing very close to important body parts. They found Trent in the VIP section, if you could call chain link fence reinforced with razor wire VIP. He was white, late 40s, wearing a suit that cost more than it should and less than he wanted you to think. His face had the weathered look of someone who'd spent time in places where sunscreen was lower priority than survival." Blossom Gates. His voice carried the smoker's rasp of someone who'd made peace with long-term consequences years ago. "Heard you retired." "I diversified." Blossom sat without invitation, and Ha Joon followed, flanking Trent in a way that wasn't threatening, but definitely wasn't friendly. "6 men came into my bar tonight. The Midnight Orchid." "Heard about that too." Trent sipped bourbon, his attention ostensibly on the cage where one fighter had just discovered that the other fighter's knee was structurally incompatible with consciousness. "Heard you handled it like old times. I want to know who bought the information. Who paid you to violate neutral ground?" "I'm a businessman." Trent's eyes finally left the cage, finding Blossom with the resigned attention of someone who'd known this conversation was inevitable. "Information flows where money flows. That's economics, not betrayal." "Economics, betrayal, from where I'm sitting, they look similar." Blossom leaned forward, her posture suggesting conversation, but her eyes suggesting autopsy. "Give me the name, Marcus. Because we both know you kept records. You always kept records. And if I don't, then I stop being polite." Blossom's hand moved casual, almost lazy, to rest on Trent's knee. "And you stop having knees that work in the traditional sense. You remember Budapest? The thing I did to Kovacs when he tried to get clever?" Trent's face did something complicated, working through memory and current threat assessment. "You're different than you used to be. I'm exactly who I always was. I just spent 10 years pretending otherwise." The pressure on his knee increased, subtle but specific, targeting nerve clusters that probably had Latin names Trent didn't want to learn. The name Marcus. In the cage, one fighter fell. The crowd roared. Money changed hands with the practiced efficiency of religion and capitalism meeting in violent matrimony. And Marcus Trent made a choice that probably saved his ability to walk without surgical intervention. Jin-Soo Ha. The name landed like explosive ordnance, precise and devastating. That's who paid. Transferred cryptocurrency through 3 dummy accounts, but I know his digital signature. The man doesn't trust anyone, which means he does his own technical work. Ha Joon went still. Not frozen still. The kind of stillness that came from the body deciding that motion was negotiable, but breathing was mandatory. "My brother." "You're what?" Blossom's attention shifted, recalculating. "My older brother." Ha Joon's voice carried the weight of theology and betrayal working through the same equation. "The one who took over after father died. The one who I thought didn't know I was alive. He knows." Trent pulled out a tablet, fingers dancing across glass and lies, pulling up files that probably shouldn't exist in any jurisdiction. "He's been tracking you for 3 years. Ever since you sent money back to Seoul. Anonymous transfer, routed through the Caymans and Singapore, but someone as paranoid as Jin-Soo? He traced it back. Found you. And then waited." "Waited for what?" Ha Joon took the tablet, seeing his own face staring back from surveillance photos taken across months. The Midnight Orchid. His apartment. The grocery store. The park where he walked on Sundays pretending that normal life was achievable. Waited until you were comfortable. Blossom understood before Trent explained. Until you'd built something. Until you believed in sanctuary. Because destroying you while you're running is efficiency. Destroying you after you've found peace? That's revenge. Trent nodded, reclaiming his tablet with the careful motion of someone who wasn't sure if his knees were still under warranty. He paid double my normal rate. Said he wanted 6 of the best. Said he wanted it done at the Midnight Orchid specifically. Said he hesitated, like maybe some words carried consequences even he wasn't comfortable delivering. Say it, Ha Joon demanded. Said he wanted you to die knowing that no place was safe. That family was forever. That the Iron Dragon's bloodline ended in shame and scotch and a bartender's pity. The cage emptied. New fighters entered, younger, hungrier, still believing that violence had rules and fairness was negotiable. The crowd's attention shifted, recalibrated, began the complex mathematics of betting on outcomes they couldn't control, but could financially benefit from. Ha Joon stood. The wound in his side protested, but pain was just information, and he had more relevant data to process. We need to leave. Agreed. Blossom rose, and something in her posture suggested the evening's politeness was officially exhausted. Marcus, you're going to forget we had this conversation. Already forgotten. Trent poured more bourbon, his hand shaking just enough to betray that survival instincts were louder than pride. But Gates? The brother knows about you too. Knows who you were. What you did. He paid for that information specifically. Said he wanted the eraser to know she failed. They left Marcus Trent to his bourbon and his cowardice, navigating back through tunnels that stank of consequences and Chicago's industrial decay. Ha Joon's mind worked through the revelation with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent a decade surviving by staying 3 moves ahead. He's not just trying to kill me, Ha Joon said when they reached the street, rain turning the city into reflection and regret. He's trying to punish you. For sparing me. For making a choice that wasn't sanctioned. Which means this was never about territory or succession. Blossom flagged down a car, not a taxi, something else, something that appeared with the practiced efficiency of resources Ha Joon didn't know she had. This is about proving that mercy has consequences. That the one time I chose humanity over protocol, it created a debt that needed collection. They got in. The driver didn't ask questions, just drove with the steady confidence of someone who understood that passengers bleeding through tactical gear usually had good reasons for urgency. Where are we going? Ha Joon asked. A safe house. One of mine. Not on any grid, not connected to any network your brother could have compromised. Blossom watched the city slide past, measuring angles and distances with the eternal paranoia of someone who'd learned that safety was temporary and survival was negotiable. We regroup, plan, and figure out how to turn your brother's revenge into his regret. And if he's already moved beyond planning? Ha Joon asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Blossom's smile was all edges and implications. Then we remind him why the eraser got that name in the first place. The safe house was 30 minutes outside Chicago proper, hidden in industrial obscurity between a defunct steel mill and a rail yard where trains went to be forgotten. 3 stories of brick and intentional decay, windows that looked abandoned but were actually reinforced polycarbonate, and a security system that probably cost more than the building's assessed value. Blossom parked in the attached garage, the door closing behind them with the hydraulic certainty of something engineered for siege conditions. Ha Joon followed her inside, his wound a constant reminder that he was operating at diminished capacity while navigating a situation that kept expanding into worse territory. The interior was Spartan furniture that prioritized function over comfort, walls that had been treated with acoustic dampening that probably violated housing codes, and a kitchen that suggested someone had thought deeply about nutrition efficiency without caring about presentation. Second floor is surveillance and communications, Blossom said, moving through the space with the easy familiarity of someone who'd spent significant time preparing for nights that hopefully never happened. Third floor is armory and tactical prep. First floor is living space, though I use that term optimistically. Ha Joon sat on a couch that was more tactical than comfortable, letting his body catalog all the ways tonight had introduced new damage to existing architecture. How many of these do you have? Safe houses? 7 across 4 states. Blossom pulled out a first aid kit, more extensive than the one in the bar, suggesting this location was prepared for sustained operations rather than temporary refuge. When you spend a decade erasing people, You learn that the best insurance policy is having places to hide when the people who employed you decide you know too much. She checked his bandages, her hands clinically efficient but not unkind. The wound was holding, which was better than the alternative, but worse than Ha Joon would have preferred. Your brother, Blossom said, attention focused on medical assessment rather than eye contact. Tell me about him. Not the file version. The real version. Ha Joon leaned back, watching ceiling tiles that probably hid cameras or sensors or both. Jin-soo is 3 years older. Father's favorite. The one who inherited ambition without inheriting doubt. When we were children, he used to tell me that family was the only thing that mattered. That blood was thicker than any alliance, any promise, any code. And you believed him? I believed father. And father believed Jin-soo was the perfect heir. Ha Joon's voice carried the weight of old disappointments and new understanding. I was the spare. The contingency. The one who was supposed to follow orders and never question strategy. But I questioned everything. And father saw that as weakness. Blossom finished with the bandages, disposed of medical waste with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done field medicine in conditions where hygiene was aspirational. So when I killed your father, your brother inherited everything. He inherited the kingdom. The network. The fear. Ha Joon met her eyes, finding something there he couldn't quite name. Maybe recognition. Maybe shared understanding of what it meant to carry legacies you didn't choose. But he didn't inherit father's talent for keeping people loyal through respect. Jin-soo rules through terror. Through demonstration. Through making examples of anyone who suggests alternatives. Which means he can't let you exist. Blossom moved to the kitchen, began making coffee with the same precision she used for everything else. Because your existence suggests alternatives. Suggests that someone could walk away from the empire and survive. More than survive. Ha Joon accepted the coffee, black, no sugar, exactly how he took it without being asked. Thrive. I sent money back to Seoul not because I wanted recognition, but because I wanted to help the families father destroyed. Anonymous, untraceable, just trying to fix some of the damage. But Jin-soo traced it. Saw mercy as weakness. Saw your charity as betrayal. Saw it as proof that I needed to be erased. Ha Joon sipped coffee that tasted like midnight and determination. Not just killed. Erased. Made into an example of what happens when you choose humanity over dynasty. The safe house settled around them, all silence and security. Blossom stood by the window, watching the rail yard through tactical glass that could stop rifle rounds and questions about why someone needed that level of protection. He made a mistake, she said finally. What mistake? He assumed the Midnight Orchid would be your grave. He assumed I was just a bartender who'd gotten lucky. He assumed, she turned, and Ha Joon saw something in her expression that made him reconsider every assumption he'd made about who Blossom Gates actually was beneath the tactical efficiency and clinical violence. He assumed mercy made me weak. The coffee went cold. The night deepened. And somewhere in the safe house's security system, alarms began their patient work of monitoring approaches that shouldn't exist and threats that weren't supposed to have found this location. They came at 4:17 a.m., when the body's circadian rhythm suggested that consciousness was optional and threat response was dulled by evolutionary assumptions about dawn being safe. But Ha Joon had spent a decade training his body to ignore biological suggestions, and Blossom had spent longer than that teaching herself that survival meant never trusting the clock. The first indication was subtle. A pressure change as the garage door's hydraulics activated. The second was more definite, tactical boots on concrete. Moving with the practiced stealth of people who'd done this enough times to be professionally silent, but not enough times to understand that Blossom Gates had designed this space specifically for situations where silence was insufficient. How many? Ha Joon asked, already moving toward the weapons rack Blossom had pointed out earlier. 8. Blossom was at the surveillance console, fingers dancing across screens showing thermal signatures surrounding the building. 4-man breach team on the ground floor, 2 covering exits, 2 on the roof positioning for vertical insertion. They're good. Professional. But they made 3 mistakes. What mistakes? They assumed this was a house. They assumed I'd be surprised. And they assumed 8 was enough. Blossom pulled on tactical gear that transformed her from bartender to something else, something that probably had job descriptions in languages Ha Joon didn't speak. Stay behind me. Watch the angles I can't. And if something goes wrong, nothing's going wrong, Ha Joon interrupted, checking the weapon she'd provided, a Glock 19, reliable as mathematics and less philosophical. Because we're not just defending. We're sending a message. The breach came fast. Professional. The kind of coordinated assault that suggested extensive training and expensive preparation. The garage door blew inward, shaped charges, precise, designed to create maximum entry advantage while minimizing warning time. The team flowed through the smoke and debris with practiced efficiency, weapons up, moving in a diamond formation that cleared corners and covered angles. They made it 6 feet inside before Blossom demonstrated why safe houses were only safe if the person defending them had spent years contemplating worst-case scenarios. The floor tiles, the ones that looked decorative but weren't, activated. Not explosives. Something smarter. Directed energy that turned ballistic gelatin armor plates into suggestions and tactical confidence into triage decisions. 2 men dropped, not dead but definitely reconsidering career choices. The other 2 adapted, moving to cover, training overriding surprise, but Blossom was already moving, using sight lines she'd designed into the space. She came up behind tactical cover, not furniture, actual Kevlar-reinforced panels that rose from the floor like malicious stage magic, and the suppressed weapon in her hands spoke with quiet authority. The third man took 2 rounds center mass and discovered that his armor rating was theoretical. The fourth man got smart, retreating toward the garage, calling for backup in a voice that carried tactical discipline and human fear in equal measure. Ha Joon moved to the stairwell, covering the approach from the 2nd floor. He'd spent a decade trying to forget the muscle memory of combat, but apparently muscle memory had better retention than he'd hoped. When the roof team came through the 3rd floor access, fast ropes and tactical aggression, he was ready. He fired 3 rounds. Not wild, not panicked, but calculated. Aimed for center mass on the first target, saw the man's momentum carry him through the skylight anyway, glass and gravity becoming temporary allies. The second target adapted, shifting angles, using the rope as temporary cover while returning fire that carved expensive chunks out of walls designed to absorb this kind of attention. Then Blossom was there. Moving up the stairs with the fluid efficiency of someone who understood that vertical space was just horizontal space with more gravitational considerations. Her weapon tracked the second target, found the gap in his tactical positioning, and delivered feedback that ended the conversation. 2 more outside, she said, not breathing hard despite having just neutralized 3 professionals while navigating architectural chaos. They're regrouping. Deciding if backup is worth dying for. They'll call it in, Ha Joon said, watching thermal signatures through a tablet Blossom provided. Report failure. Let your brother know. He stopped, realization hitting like theology. This wasn't about killing us. No. Blossom checked her weapon, reloaded with the practiced efficiency of ritual. This was about confirming we're together. Confirming I'm protecting you. Giving your brother exactly the information he needs to upgrade from professionals to personal. He's coming himself. He'll want to. Pride, revenge, the need to demonstrate that family betrayal has consequences. Blossom moved to the window, watching the 2 remaining attackers retreat with the tactical dignity of people who'd lost the element of surprise and most of their team. But first, he'll want to hurt us. Not just kill us. Hurt us. Make it personal. Ha Joon joined her at the window, watching Chicago's industrial sprawl gradually lighten as dawn approached with its usual indifference to human drama. So we run. We prepare. Blossom's reflection in the tactical glass showed something Ha Joon hadn't seen before. Not the clinical killer, not the efficient bartender, but something else. Someone who'd made a choice 10 years ago and was now committed to defending that choice regardless of cost. Your brother wants to prove mercy has consequences. We're going to prove that some consequences bite back. They spent the next 2 hours turning the safe house into a testament to paranoid preparation. Blossom moved through the space with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd wargamed scenarios like this enough times to have contingencies for the contingencies. Ha Joon followed her instructions, placing charges, setting traps, creating kill zones that looked like architectural features but functioned as evolutionary filters. As the sun finally crested Chicago's skyline, turning rain-slicked streets into momentary gold, Ha Joon found himself standing at the counter where Blossom was assembling something that looked like bourbon but smelled like kerosene and malicious chemistry. 10 years ago, you saved my life, he said. 10 years ago, I made a choice my employers would have killed me for. She didn't look up from her work, measuring liquids with the same precision she used for everything else. Why? Now she looked up, meeting his eyes with the directness of someone who'd spent too long hiding behind professional distance. Because in a career full of terrible choices and worse consequences, I wanted one thing I did to mean something other than another name in a file. You were crying. Trying to burn evidence of your father's crimes. Trying to erase the legacy before it could define you. And I thought, she paused, like maybe some truths were harder to voice than bullets were to dodge. You thought what? I thought maybe mercy was a skill I'd forgotten I had. And maybe, just maybe, practicing it once would make the rest of the terrible things I'd done hurt less. Ha Joon reached out, not sure what he intended, but Blossom caught his hand. Not romantic, practical. The grip of someone checking for steadiness, for commitment, for the kind of determination that turned survival from hope into strategy. Today we teach your brother that mercy isn't weakness, she said. It's just violence with better targeting parameters. Subscribe to see how this unfolds. Do not forget to comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The phone rang at 6:43 a.m. cutting through the safe house's tactical silence with the kind of audacity that suggested the caller didn't fear being traced. Ha Joon stared at the screen. Blocked number, but the pattern of the ring was unmistakable. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. The code their father had taught them when they were children, back when family meant something other than target acquisition. Blossom looked up from the surveillance console, her expression asking the question her voice didn't need to. It's him, Ha Joon said and answered. Little brother. Jinsu's voice carried across the distance with the smooth polish of someone who'd spent years transforming Seoul dialect into boardroom authority. I hope you're comfortable. Though I suspect comfort is relative when you're bleeding in a safe house that's less safe than advertised. Ha Joon moved to the window. Watching Chicago wake up to another day of pretending violence was exceptional rather than systemic. You violated neutral ground. Neutral ground. Jinsu laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement rather than theatrical malice. You always were sentimental, Joon. Believing in rules, in sanctuary, in the fantasy that walking away made you innocent. Father saw that weakness. I see it. The entire world sees it. If it's weakness, why did you need 8 professionals to fail at killing me? The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Long enough for Ha Joon to understand that his brother was recalculating, adjusting strategies, upgrading threat assessments from theoretical to confirmed. The bartender, Jinsu said finally. She's more than she appeared. How delightfully inefficient of the universe to place the woman who spared your life 10 years ago in the exact position to do it again. Some might call that fate. I call it an opportunity. An opportunity for what? To correct her mistake. To demonstrate that mercy is just delayed execution wearing a sympathetic face. To prove that the Iron Dragon's bloodline ends exactly where father intended, in shame, in exile, in the arms of someone foolish enough to believe saving you meant anything other than postponing the inevitable. Blossom appeared beside Ha Joon, close enough to hear both sides of the conversation. She didn't speak, but her presence suggested support, backup, the kind of partnership that developed between people who'd bled together and discovered survival created its own language. You're not doing this for father's legacy, Ha Joon said, voice steady despite the revelation unfolding like conspiracy and theology. You're doing this because I proved you don't have to be what he made us. Because my existence suggests alternatives, and alternatives threaten everything you've built on his foundation. Philosophy. Jinsu's voice carried dismissal wrapped in condescension. You always preferred theory to practice, questions to answers, weakness to strength. But let me educate you on practical matters, little brother. I'm not in Seoul. I'm in Chicago. Have been for 3 days, preparing, planning, assembling resources that will turn your sanctuary into a demonstration. A demonstration of what? Of consequences. Of the price of betrayal. Of what happens when you choose mercy over family. The phone call carried ambient sound now, wind, industrial ambience, the particular acoustic signature of open space near water. There's a shipyard terminal on the east side. Abandoned since the recession, perfect for privacy, ideal for the kind of conversation that needs bodies rather than witnesses. You know the location. Grid reference 41.7218, minus 87.5389. Be there at midnight, or I'll start visiting everyone you've spoken to in the past year and teaching them about collateral consequences. If I come, you'll let them go? Ha Joon asked, though he already knew the answer. If you come, I'll make it quick. Relatively. You have my word as blood and air. Jin-soo's voice carried finality, the kind that suggested negotiations were concluded and compliance was mandatory. Oh, and Joon? Bring the bartender. She's the reason this is necessary. Only fair she watches what her mercy costs. The line went dead. Chicago continued its morning routine, indifferent to phone calls and threats and the particular mathematics of family betrayal. It's a trap, Blossom said, though her tone suggested she was stating obvious facts rather than offering analysis. Obviously. Ha Joon set down the phone with the care of someone handling theological questions. But he'll make good on the threat. Everyone I've interacted with, grocery clerks, neighbors, the woman who runs the bookstore I visit on Thursdays, they're all leverage. All potential casualties. He's escalating to force confrontation. Blossom moved to the surveillance console, fingers dancing across keyboards, pulling up satellite imagery of the shipyard terminal Jin-soo had specified. The location was exactly as advertised, abandoned, isolated, surrounded by industrial decay and the kind of privacy that suggested either drug deals or executions, depending on the week. But he made a mistake, she added, zooming in on the terminal's layout. What mistake? He told us where he'd be. Gave us coordinates, gave us time to prepare, gave us every advantage except surprise. Blossom pulled up additional screens, CCTV feeds from surrounding areas, traffic cameras, even a weather satellite showing cloud cover and wind patterns. Which means either he's extraordinarily confident or he wants us to prepare. Wants us to come equipped, tactical, ready for war. Why would he want that? Because killing us when we're ready means more. Blossom's eyes tracked data streams, information flowing across screens like violence waiting for coordinates. It means proving his superiority isn't luck or surprise, but fundamental. It means she stopped, her expression doing something complicated that Ha Joon had learned meant she'd discovered a threat parameter that changed equations. What? The satellite feed. She expanded an image, enhanced it with software that probably violated surveillance laws in 3 countries. The shipyard terminal showed thermal signatures, not just Jin-soo, but dozens of people. Armed, positioned, creating a perimeter that suggested this wasn't an ambush. It was an execution ground designed for demonstration and documentary purposes. He brought an army. He brought a militia. Blossom counted signatures with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done target assessment enough times to be clinically accurate. 37 professionals, not counting your brother. Former military, probably private contractor quality. They've been staging there for hours, preparing, creating kill zones that turn the entire terminal into a tactical nightmare. So we're walking into an execution. We're walking into an opportunity. Blossom closed the surveillance feeds, turned to face Ha Joon with the kind of expression that suggested she'd made a decision and was now committed to defending it regardless of probability or sanity. Because your brother isn't the only one who knows how to escalate. She pulled out a phone, not the commercial model most people carried, but something else, something that looked military spec and functionally dangerous. The call connected after 1 ring. This is Eraser 7, Blossom said, using a designation Ha Joon had never heard before. Authorization code Omega Black 37. I need to invoke Protocol Sanctuary. The voice on the other end was female, crisp, carrying the kind of authority that suggested rank and responsibility intersecting. Eraser 7, you've been dark for 10 years. Protocol Sanctuary requires active classification. I'm aware. I'm also aware that my classification was never officially terminated because officially, I never existed. Which means my protocols are still valid, and Protocol Sanctuary still applies when someone violates terms of separation. Silence on the other end. Then, explain the violation. My former agency tracked my location, provided intelligence to a hostile operative, facilitated an assault on a protected asset. Blossom's voice carried the clinical detachment of someone filing reports rather than requesting interventions. I'm invoking Sanctuary under original terms, assistance in eliminating the threat, followed by permanent separation and classification upgrade. You're asking us to help you fight your old employers. I'm reminding you that I spent 15 years doing work you'd never acknowledge for purposes you'd never defend, and in exchange, you guaranteed that if I walked away clean, I stayed clean. Someone violated that guarantee. I'm collecting on the warranty. More silence. Then the woman's voice returned, carrying grudging respect wrapped in bureaucratic resignation. Coordinates. Blossom provided them. Target is a private militia, approximately 40 hostiles, led by Jin Soo-ha, current head of the Seoul Dragon Syndicate. They're staging for an execution. I need suppression, extraction, and cleanup. You're asking for an act of war. I'm asking for a reckoning. Blossom's eyes found Ha Joon's, holding his gaze while speaking to the woman on the phone. 10 years ago, I spared someone your agency wanted dead. Tonight, I'm finishing what I started, protecting him from everyone, including you. The woman on the phone sighed, the sound carrying exhaustion and acceptance in equal measure. Eraser 7, you always were inconvenient. Assets will be on station by 2300 hours. But after this, your classification changes. You're not dark anymore. You're extinct. No records, no contacts, no emergency protocols. You'll be truly alone. That was always the plan, Blossom said, and ended the call. Ha Joon processed the conversation, working through implications and consequences. You just burned your last bridge to protect me. I just demonstrated that mercy is expensive and I'm willing to pay retail. Blossom moved to the armory, began selecting weapons with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this calculation enough times to have preferences. Your brother wants to prove that saving you is a mistake. I'm going to prove that the only mistake was his assumption that I'd let him finish what I started. They could betray you. Show up and eliminate everyone, including us. They could. Probably should, from a policy perspective. Blossom checked a rifle, something tactical and expensive, the kind that came with warranties and body counts. But the woman I just spoke to? She was my handler. 15 years of missions, of eliminations, of doing terrible things because someone decided they were necessary. She owes me. Not officially, not legally, but in the way that matters when you've seen someone at their worst and they didn't judge. So we trust her. We trust that she understands debts. Blossom began loading magazines, each round seated with the precision of ritual. And we prepare for the likelihood that trust is optimistic and paranoia is survival. They spent the day transforming preparation into religion. Blossom moved through the safe house with methodical intensity, assembling gear, reviewing tactical plans, turning speculation into doctrine. Ha Joon followed her instructions, learning the particular mathematics of how to turn disadvantage into leverage when the disadvantage was 40 armed professionals and the leverage was knowledge of terrain they hadn't had time to study. The shipyard terminal has 3 entry points, Blossom explained, using satellite imagery and architectural blueprints acquired through methods Ha Joon suspected involved hacking and enthusiasm. Main gate, cargo bay on the east side, and a maintenance access on the north wall. Your brother's militia will cover all 3, creating a kill box that turns entry into suicide. So how do we enter? We don't. Blossom pulled up additional imagery, sewage maps, utility tunnels, the kind of infrastructure cities built and then forgot existed. We come from below. Storm drain system connects to the terminal's basement level. Abandoned since the 80s, not on most maps, perfect for insertion that bypasses their perimeter. You've done this before. I've studied this before. There's a difference between doing and preparing to do, but both require the same paranoid attention to detail. She traced a route on the screen, fingers mapping their approach with the confidence of someone who'd learned that confidence was just preparation meeting opportunity. We insert at 2,330 hours, 30 minutes before your brother's deadline. Gives us time to position, to turn their kill box into our ambush, to demonstrate that being outnumbered is just math waiting for better variables. Ha Joon studied the maps, his mind working through scenarios and probabilities. And when your agency assets arrive, they'll provide suppression from external positions. Keep the militia contained, prevent reinforcements, create enough chaos that your brother's tactical advantage becomes tactical liability. Blossom met his eyes, her expression carrying the weight of choices made and consequences accepted. But the endgame? That's ours. Your brother, the confrontation he wants, the demonstration he's planned, we don't deny him that. We just rewrite the conclusion. You're going to let me face him. I'm going to let you choose how to face him. Blossom's voice carried the kind of respect that came from understanding that some fights were personal and intervention was just postponement. He's family. Betrayal, malice, attempted murder. He's still family. That decision? That's yours. The afternoon faded into evening, which faded into the particular darkness that Chicago wore like reputation and warning. They prepared in silence, each reviewing their roles, checking equipment, engaging in the small rituals that turned preparation into confidence and confidence into survival. At 2,300 hours, they departed the safe house in tactical black. Armed with weapons that probably violated ordinances in multiple jurisdictions and carrying the kind of determination that came from understanding tonight answered questions that had been accumulating for a decade. The storm drain entrance was exactly where the maps promised, hidden behind industrial refuse and the kind of decay that made people look away rather than investigate. They descended into Chicago's underground infrastructure, navigating tunnels that smelled like history and sewage, using night vision and practiced stealth to move through darkness that was both literal and metaphorical. The terminal's basement access appeared after 30 minutes of navigation, exactly as Blossom's research promised. The door was rusted, abandoned, probably hadn't been opened in years. Blossom produced a pry bar, applied leverage and determination, and the door yielded with the reluctant protest of metal accepting inevitability. They emerged into the terminal's lower level, a maze of abandoned offices and storage rooms that had watched decades of commerce followed by decades of decay. The structure above them carried ambient sound, boots on metal, voices carrying tactical discipline, the particular acoustic signature of people preparing for violence. Positions, Blossom whispered, moving through the darkness with the practiced certainty of someone who'd learned that hesitation was indistinguishable from failure. They navigated to an elevated catwalk overlooking the terminal's main floor, finding cover behind structural elements that provided concealment and firing positions. Below, Jin Soo-ha held court like violence wearing a suit. He stood in the center of the terminal floor, surrounded by his militia in formation, all tactical gear and professional readiness. The lighting was theatrical, portable floods creating illumination that turned the space into stage and demonstration ground. He's waiting, Ha Joon observed, checking his weapon with the practiced efficiency of muscle memory that survived a decade of attempted retirement. He's performing. Blossom scanned the perimeter through a scope, counting positions, identifying threats, creating target hierarchies. This isn't about efficiency. It's about demonstration. He wants you to see his power, his resources, his superiority before the terminal's main door exploded inward. Not breached, detonated, with the kind of shaped charge that suggested military specification and professional application. Smoke and concussion filled the space, and through that chaos came suppressive fire from external positions. Blossom's agency had arrived. The militia reacted with trained efficiency, returning fire, establishing cover, transforming from static positions into dynamic threat response. But they'd positioned for containing Ha Joon and Blossom, not for defending against external assault. Their kill box became a tactical liability as bullets found gaps in coverage and suppression turned advantage into attrition. Now, Blossom said, and began engaging targets with the clinical precision of someone who'd done this enough times to be professionally excellent. Ha Joon joined her, selecting targets on the perimeter, providing covering fire while Blossom moved through the shadows of the terminal with the fluid grace of violence choreographed by someone who understood that efficiency was just preparation meeting lethal intent. The militia discovered they were surrounded. External assets suppressing from multiple angles, Blossom and Ha Joon engaging from elevated positions they hadn't considered, their tactical superiority dissolving into chaos and casualties. The professionals adapted, some retreating to secondary positions, others pressing attacks that suggested they were paid enough to accept risk, but not enough to welcome suicide. Through the chaos, Jin-soo remained calm, almost serene, watching his carefully planned execution ground become something else entirely. He pulled a phone, made a call, spoke words Ha Joon couldn't hear but suspected involved escalation and consequences. "He's calling reinforcements," Ha Joon said, tracking his brother through the scope. "Or he's activating contingencies." Blossom dropped 2 more targets, her movements economical, each shot placed with the precision of someone who understood that ammunition was finite but efficiency was negotiable. "Either way, we need to close this before the terminal's north wall exploded. Not breached, destroyed, with demolition charges that turned structure into debris and tactical positioning into chaos. Through the gap came additional forces, not militia but something else, tactical gear that looked government spec, movement patterns that suggested more training than private contractors typically received." "Blossom." Ha Joon's voice carried warning and recognition. "Those aren't your assets." "No." Blossom's expression did something complicated, working through betrayal and confirmation simultaneously. "Those are my old agency. The ones who tracked me. The ones your brother partnered with." The new arrivals engaged with clinical efficiency, targeting both the militia and Blossom's called-in assets. The terminal became a 3-way firefight, all positioning and suppression, and the particular mathematics of combat where survival meant maintaining cover while denying it to others. He planned this, Ha Joon realized, watching Jin-soo move to cover with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd anticipated exactly this development. "Used you calling for help to draw out your old agency. Turned your sanctuary protocol into bait. Which means tonight was never about killing us cleanly." Blossom engaged new targets, her rifle speaking with quiet authority. It was about demonstrating that nowhere is safe, no one can be trusted, and mercy always has cascading consequences. "So, what do? We adapt." Blossom pulled charges from her tactical vest, the kind designed for creating new exits when exits weren't architecturally provided. "We turn his demonstration into our conclusion. And we make absolutely certain that when this is finished, Jin-soo Ha understands that some debts compound faster than he calculated." She handed Ha Joon half the charges, their eyes meeting in the darkness and chaos. "You wanted to face your brother. Time to demonstrate that the spare became something the heir never anticipated." They moved through the terminal, using the 3-way firefight as cover, setting charges on structural supports with the practiced efficiency of people who'd decided that if the evening was going to be architecturally destructive, they might as well direct the destruction purposefully. The militia and agency forces continued their engagement, neither side gaining permanent advantage. Both sides bleeding casualties into the terminal's floor while Jin-soo directed movements with hand signals and tactical discipline. Ha Joon reached the terminal floor, using debris and chaos for cover, working his way toward where his brother held position behind a shipping container turned impromptu bunker. The wound in his side protested, but pain was just information, and he had more relevant data to process. "Jin-soo," he called out, voice carrying across the firefight with the kind of projection that suggested importance. The shooting paused, not stopped, but diminished. Participants recognizing that something fundamental was shifting from tactical engagement to personal confrontation. Jin-soo stepped from cover, weapon lowered, but not holstered, his face carrying the same expression Ha Joon remembered from childhood. Not anger. Not hatred. Just the cold assessment of someone who viewed obstacles as problems requiring solutions rather than moral considerations. "Little brother." Jin-soo's voice remained calm despite the chaos around them. You've made this unnecessarily complicated. All you had to do was die quietly, accept that father's legacy had concluded. Let me demonstrate that mercy was weakness. Father's legacy concluded the night Blossom killed him. Ha Joon kept his weapon aimed at the ground between them, finger outside the trigger guard, demonstrating that this conversation still had choices. Everything since then has been you building a throne on a foundation that was already crumbling. Philosophy. Still preferring theory to practice. Jin-soo gestured at the terminal, at the bodies, at the evidence of force and planning. I brought 40 professionals. I partnered with a government agency. I turned your sanctuary protocol into a trap that drew everyone into a single space where I could demonstrate permanent superiority. And you? You brought sentimentality and a bartender. I brought the woman who spared my life. Who saw humanity where you see vulnerability? Who demonstrated that mercy isn't weakness, it's just violence with better targeting parameters. Ha Joon raised his weapon, not quickly, not threateningly, but deliberately. Last chance, Jin-soo. Walk away. Let this grudge die. Accept that not everything Father taught us was theology. Father taught us that family is forever. Jin-soo's weapon came up, smooth and practiced, the kind of motion that suggested training and acceptance. That blood is thicker than anything else. That betrayal has permanent consequences. Father taught us lies wrapped in loyalty. Ha Joon's finger found the trigger, muscle memory, and moral calculus intersecting. And tonight, those lies end. But before either could fire, the terminal's ceiling exploded, not demolished, but punctured from above by something that dropped through with the controlled chaos of tactical insertion and acrobatic confidence. Blossom landed between them, rolling to absorb impact, coming up with weapons drawn and aimed at both brothers simultaneously. Enough, she said, voice carrying the kind of authority that came from being the person most prepared for violence in a room full of violent people. Ha Joon, your brother is bait. Jin-soo, your plan has better architecture than you realized. She gestured with her weapon, not at the brothers, but at a figure emerging from the terminal's administrative offices. A woman in tactical gear that looked government spec, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades making decisions that others had to live with or die from. Hello, Blossom, the woman said, her voice carrying the same crisp authority Ha Joon had heard on the phone earlier. It's been too long. Handler. Blossom's weapons never wavered. I should have known you wouldn't honor Sanctuary. That you'd use my call as location confirmation. That you'd partner with Jin-soo to turn this into an opportunity to eliminate everyone who knows about the program. Nothing personal. The handler moved into the light, revealing a woman in her 50s, attractive in the way that suggested discipline and genetics working in harmony, dangerous in the way that suggested authority backed by competence. You disappeared 10 years ago knowing too much. Jin-soo provided an opportunity to resolve that liability while simultaneously demonstrating to future assets what happens when retirement turns into risk. So this was always a setup. Jin-soo's ambush, my sanctuary call, the entire evening designed to gather everyone into a space where you could eliminate witnesses and problems simultaneously. Efficiently. The handler smiled, the expression carrying approval wrapped in menace. You taught others to be thorough, Blossom. Tonight, I'm demonstrating I learned from the best. The terminal settled into tense equilibrium, militia and agency forces holding positions, Blossom between the brothers, the handler directing the performance, and somewhere in the darkness, Blossom's called-in assets maintaining external suppression. So what happens now? Ha Joon asked. You eliminate all of us? Blame it on gang violence? File it under operational closure and move on to the next problem. Essentially. The handler checked her watch with the casual certainty of someone working on schedule. Demolition charges are set throughout the structure. In approximately 5 minutes, this terminal collapses, burying everyone and everything. My team extracts, leaves evidence suggesting Jin-soo's operation went catastrophically wrong, and everyone gets closure. Except closure is just the story you tell when you don't want to admit failure. Blossom's voice carried confidence that suggested plans within plans. Those charges you mentioned? I set them 6 minutes ago while your teams were engaged. And they're not set to bury everyone. They're set to create exits. The handler's expression flickered, not fear, but recalculation, understanding that plans were colliding with contingencies. The charges Ha Joon and I placed are on a dead man's trigger, Blossom continued, pulling a device from her vest, small, unassuming, carrying the particular threat of electronics and explosives intersecting. Either I trigger them manually, creating structured collapse that gives us exits and buries your teams, or I release this trigger and they all detonate simultaneously, turning the terminal into rubble and everyone into forensic evidence. You're bluffing. But the handler's voice carried uncertainty now. I'm the person you trained to never bluff when explosives are involved. Blossom's smile was all edges. So here's your choice. Walk away. Take your teams, take your operational objectives, take your bureaucratic need for closure. Or stay and discover that the one time I showed mercy 10 years ago wasn't weakness, it was practice for tonight, when I demonstrate what mercy looks like armed with better intel and comprehensive preparation. The silence stretched, all waiting and calculation, and the particular mathematics of determining if survival meant retreat or commitment. The handler made her choice. She gestured to her teams, subtle hand signals that suggested withdrawal, regroup, recalculate from safer distance. The agency forces began tactical retreat, moving through the terminal with the practiced efficiency of people who understood that sometimes survival meant accepting incomplete victories. Jin-soo watched this development with the expression of someone who'd bet everything on an outcome and discovered the table was rigged. He looked at Ha Joon, then at Blossom, then back at the retreating forces. This doesn't end, he said quietly. Family is forever. Betrayal has permanent consequences. I'll find you again. Then you'll die again trying. Ha Joon's weapon remained aimed, steady, his voice carrying the weight of a decade of trying to escape and finally accepting that some things required confrontation rather than distance. Because tonight you demonstrated everything wrong with Father's legacy. The violence, the paranoia, the belief that power requires permanent suffering. And I'm done running from that legacy. Done pretending exile means anything other than postponement. He lowered his weapon, deliberately, the gesture carrying more weight than threats. Go home, Jin-soo. Inherit Father's empire. Rule Seoul with the fear and control you've cultivated. But understand this, if you come for me again, if you threaten anyone I've connected with, if you so much as send another phone call with threats wrapped in family obligation, I won't run. I won't hide. I'll come to Seoul, and I'll dismantle everything Father built and you inherited, piece by piece, until the dragon legacy is nothing but warnings in history books. Jin-soo's face worked through emotions that might have been rage, might have been respect, might have been the first recognition that his little brother had become something the Empire couldn't contain. You've changed, he said finally. I've survived. Ha Joon holstered his weapon with the finality of closing chapters. Now leave, before Blossom decides mercy is overrated and triggers are negotiable. Jin-soo left, followed by the remnants of his militia, moving through the terminal's destruction toward exits that still functioned. The space emptied, all tactical withdrawal and tactical failure, leaving only Blossom and Ha Joon standing in the ruins of Jin-soo's demonstration ground. Blossom lowered her weapons, examined the dead man's trigger with clinical detachment. That was reckless. That was necessary. Ha Joon joined her in the center of the floor, standing in the space where his brother had planned execution and found confrontation instead. He needed to see that I'm not the scared exile anymore. That mercy doesn't mean weakness. That despair became something the heir never anticipated. And what's that? Someone who chooses how the story ends rather than accepting the ending others write. Ha Joon looked at the device in Blossom's hand. That trigger actually functional? Absolutely. Blossom pressed a button, and nothing happened. But the charges are set for controlled collapse on a 30-minute timer. Enough time for everyone to extract, not enough time for the handler to send teams back to verify. By morning, this terminal is rubble, evidence is buried, and everyone gets to file reports about operational complications and acceptable losses. They walked through the terminal toward the storm drain entrance, leaving destruction and consequence behind them. Outside, Chicago's night continued, indifferent to their violence and equally indifferent to their survival. What happens now? Ha Joon asked as they emerged from the tunnels, breathing air that tasted like freedom and possibility. Now, Blossom stripped off tactical gear, returning to something approximating civilian appearance. Now we rebuild. The Midnight Orchid, our sanctuary, our lives. And we accept that mercy is expensive, survival is negotiable, but some choices are worth defending regardless of cost. 6 weeks later, the Midnight Orchid reopened with new floors, new tables, and a bullet-resistant bar that looked decorative but functioned as statement. The jazz played smoothly, the drinks were expertly crafted, and the clientele learned that neutral ground meant something when the bartender was Blossom Gates and the silent partner was Ha Joon. They sat at the mahogany bar in the early morning hours after closing, sharing 30-year-old scotch that had survived the ambush and tasted like memory and survival in equal measure. "Got an interesting call today," Blossom said, reviewing a ledger that tracked both cocktails and other, less legal consultations. A senator who needs security consultation. A CEO who suspects corporate espionage. A witness who needs protective services. "We're becoming a different kind of business," Ha Joon observed, watching ice melt in expensive glass. "We're becoming what we should have been all along." Blossom closed the ledger, met his eyes with the directness of someone who'd saved his life twice and earned the right to honesty. A place where people come not because they're running, but because they're choosing to stop running and start defending what matters. Cleanup services with moral considerations. Precisely. Blossom poured more scotch, the ritual of shared drink in shared space. We erase problems, protect people, and enforce the kind of sanctuary that governments promise, but rarely deliver. We just do it with better bourbon and no bureaucratic oversight. Ha Joon raised his glass, the platinum watch on his wrist catching light that no longer felt like countdown but like possibility. To mercy with better targeting parameters. To consequences that compound in unexpected directions. Blossom touched her glass to his, the sound clear and definite in the quiet bar. They drank, and somewhere in Seoul, Jin Soo-ha received a package containing evidence of 3 board members planning coup, a complete dossier on government officials accepting bribes, and a note that read simply, "Family is forever." Use this information wisely, or discover what little brother learned about consequences. The Midnight Orchid's lights dimmed as dawn approached, and in the space between darkness and morning, 2 people who'd chosen mercy over protocol discovered that some debts, when properly managed, didn't destroy you. They just redefined what survival could look like when you stopped running and started building. Thanks for staying till the end. Do not forget to subscribe to Afro-Korean Stories. Also make sure to like this video, comment where you are watching from, and share to your friends and family.